So Maree creates site-specific film works, text and photography, and her work addresses connections between memory and loss. Barry's film work has been screened at international film festivals and cultural institutions such as the Irish Film Institute, the Dublin International Film Festival, Darklight Film Festival, Aesthetica, Curtis Villa de Conde, Indie Cork, Le Rencontres Internationales, the Lab, Dublin, Tampere Art Museum, the Glucksman in Cork. Her film work, called Missing Green, is part of the F-rated short films by Irish women series. And Leisure with Dignity, which you'll see excerpts of, premiered at the Lab, Foley Street, Dublin in 2017 as part of her solo exhibition, Otium cum Dignitate, Leisure with Dignity, curated by Sheena Barrett. And the film has been exhibited and screened at A Nation Under Influence, Ireland at 100, the Centre Culturel Irlandese, Paris. Who Will Write the History of Tears, Artists and Women's Rights at the Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw. And New Irish Video Croatian Association of Visual Arts in Zagreb. And The Tart with the Cart, Sex and Vulnerability in Ireland, the Women's Museum at Aarhus. And Leisure with Dignity is also part of the Arts Council collection as well, so welcome, Maree.
Oh, thank you. That was great, Linda. Where is she?
Up here.
Oh, yeah. It was great and horrifying at the same time. Yeah, I didn't realise so much of that hair cutting. I rewatched The Wind That Shakes the Barley the other day, and I'd seen that scene as well, and kind of stuck with me as well. So today, Leisure with Dignity is actually 24 minutes long, but I've chosen 2 monologues today to show you, and they're from women from the Monto. Leisure with Dignity is like sandwiched between like a few things. So I came back from a stint in Canada, and I was taken up artist residency at the Fire Station Artist Studios in Dublin, and I was adjacent to the Monto and an old Magdalen laundry as well that I could see from my studio where I lived as well. I also came back to the marriage equality referendum. I came back to 1916 commemorations, and I also came back to then the Repeal the 8 referendum as well. So my film works are primarily research based, and they're site specific, as in I walk around the area where I live and I kind of embody the work as well. And it's a really long, convoluted process, so I've actually taken a break from it for the past while, which has been quite nice. But what I realised about Monto was that it was outside a patriarchal structure. It was women who were the madams, they were the business owners, they were quite formidable. I was going to work with Terry Fagan, like the local historian in the area. He does walking tours in the Monto, but he was working with someone else at the time. But as a filmmaker and writing these monologues, they gave me free rein to even put in my own experiences as a contemporary like woman, as in say around that time 2015-16, Tinder had just started, Bumble and everything, so you're meeting all these men that you actually don't really know. So not that relates to being a sex worker, but that kind of saying like, you know, am I safe in this situation and what can happen? Do you have anything else to say? That's it. I'm going to show the 2 excerpts now, and then we can discuss later. Thank you.
Attended balls in the Gresham Hotel. I brought him back to Monto with the help of a speeding.
All right, thanks so much to both of you. And as somebody who's interested in gender and representation, both of those presentations have really struck me. First of all, because of the parallels, like part of what I was thinking about during it was the way in which Catholicism is usually kind of seen to be the starting point of some kind of oppression against women, particularly kind of the gendered violence against women, kind of the post-1922 period. And in fact, what we see in both of your presentations is that the country is unsafe for women in many different ways beforehand. And Linda, I'll go to you first, because one of the things I was struck by, even in Ryan's Daughter, which is this attempt to kind of acknowledge, let's say, the violence that was enacted against women, and to show a certain type of sympathy to women. But actually, in the film space itself and in the kind of editing of that sequence, we get 3 points of view, each from men, looking at and so it's almost like they're they're the people who suffer, who experience it. So there's this kind of, to me, it's attempting to show it, but actually it's still kind of framing it as something that men go through. And for your paper, or the presentation, the film, I was really struck by this kind of, one of the things I was interested in is, have you actually found evidence that in the Monto there was this passing of information back and forth through the rebels? Is that something that you've taken from history, or something that's
there was, yeah.
Okay, so I'll open up to questions. Does anybody have any? About any of the papers? Yeah, go ahead.
I was just wondering, with the monologues, I know you said you had a bit there from history, but sort of how did you come up with the framing and the kind of going in and back, with the framing of the context of what they were saying, and then the actual framing of like going in and out with them?
There's like 4 characters in the film. Like there's the custom house, Kitty D that you saw there, Countess Alborough. Alborough House is in Dublin 1, around the corner from the Monto, and that's where the film title comes from, because their motto was Otium cum dignitate, leisure with dignity, and then that building then turned into an army barracks as well, so they would have been customers for the Monto as well. So there was that kind of layering, and then from the studio I could see all those buildings as well. With the moving in and out, that actually was like budget constraints, and I shot it in a Access Theatre in Ballymun, and it was pretty much, I think I'd been looking at that film director, I think Glazer, and that's his surname, and it's that film with Scarlett Johansson, and she's an alien in Glasgow. I can't remember the title now, but it was just she walked along this kind of like tar kind of material in this odd house, and then she captures the men and eats them or whatever. And I was fascinated by that film and the context of it as well, and then that these women as well, I hadn't, apart from like say Peter Mullen's film on the Magdalen laundries, like I haven't seen like first person or people talking to you about it, so that's why I did a monologue instead of like action scene or whatever. But it was like due to budget constraints as well. Like I did get funding from the Visual Arts Project Award for it, but it was it was a lot of work. And then the KCD, that's Katie, she's like a model photographer that I met at a course at the Irish Writer Centre. And then Niamh McCann, she does a lot of work, she's a friend, and she does a lot of work with that theatre company,
Anu?
yeah, so she's one of the new players, yeah. So there was a collaboration with the two of them as well. And then with the singing as well, I think like John was talking earlier, about the Rosa Tree, but with Dicey Riley, like I slowed that down myself, and I used to sing that in the studio a lot, and I slowed it right down, and then I would sing it for Niamh, record it and sing it, and then that's her version there as well. So it was looking at like folk songs as well. I didn't want to use Take Her Up to Monto at all. And then all these songs are very jovial as well, which actually the words to Dicey Riley is all about like women aging as well. It's like, it's kind of really sad. Yeah.
It's a beautiful piece of work, really effective.
Thank you.
Amazing, the kind of, what you realise in both of the presentations there is like how absent women's experiences are, and particularly how almost they're kind of rendered absent. So it's not just by mistake, it's kind of, this is a difficult history, and therefore we don't see so many film representations of haircutting, and we don't really get women's voices about their experiences, because it kind of damages that narrative for a while, which was, oh no, actually we're progressed into being a nation state, and that is seen as somehow progressive. So it's quite interesting. Any other questions? One at the back. Sorry, Dennis. Yeah.
Okay. My question just for Linda. It's just in relation to Ryan's daughter, because you were saying that like hair taking in our history wouldn't necessarily have had the parading element, but then in Ryan's daughter she's taught it like that, and I'm wondering, was that just for the film and the drama, or did that occur sometimes here?
Not so much, no. And actually, if you notice, or no, you wouldn't have noticed because I didn't show it. It was actually a woman who clipped the hair. Now there are a tiny number of examples of that in the Irish Revolution, but by and large, it's predominantly a kind of. I suppose if you want to talk about structural violence, you know, the structure is those groups I talked about. You know, particularly in the IRA side, you know, there would have been large groups. You know, the same kind of characteristics, the masks, the patterns I outlined. The Crown forces were different. It was mostly night raids. You know, that's when, you know, these occur. There's lots of examples, mainly Republican families targeted, but not exclusively. So I, you know, how much, I showed that one really because first of all it was 1970, so I think that's interesting in terms of, but also it's less violent than The Wind That Shakes the Barley. I didn't, you know, today, you know, you have to have you have to build up the right context and you know, warn people ahead and so forth, you know, so now it is pretty horrific, but it's not as violent, I think, as The Wind That Shakes the Barley, which is probably more realistic. So I suppose that kind of answers. I think as well, you don't know, I mean, I don't know, maybe other people are scholars of Ryan's Daughter, but where they took their script from, you know, were they actually drawing more on what happened in the memory of the Second World War and applying that to Ireland with some kind of memory that, you know, but it's not realistic, but I suppose the theme is, you know, is there, isn't it? And that she was having quite an open affair. If you watch the movie like I did, and they were walking up the beach, and they were sort of a beautiful beach in Dingle, and you know, it was a very she was being, you know, open, really. It was in secret, but it wasn't really, you know, so which would have been a very risky. But I think there's huge parallels, I think, between what both of us, you know, the pillow talk. You know, that's really that kind of intimacy, isn't there, as well? And that idea, I suppose, what cuts across all of it as well is, you know, I tried to find a more eloquent term, but you know, that contemporary notion of she was asking for it. So female culpability, that same in yours, that she did something, the cutting of the beige, you know, she did something, she deserves that. And you know, that kind of misogyny and how that ties in then with impunity for those kinds of attacks, because they're never prosecuted. So so there's lots to unpack, but I'm not sure how realistic it is, but it kind of picks up on the themes, you know.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Oh yeah, or like there is I think Rita mentioned that Devil Air is in, I don't know, is it in Michael Collins or or was it in a previous script that there are certain things one shouldn't do for their country, and then they all laugh. You know, because prostitution was like huge at the time, and De Valera was like totally, you know, he did want this like you know, house homemaker female. You just even had to be anyway assertive, and you were put in the laundry. So they were.
Even the quote I put up from the women going out to Ballincollig to meet the soldiers, a friend has suggested to me that her way of life remark is that perhaps these women were prostitutes, but I can't, I don't know.
Oh, sorry, thanks. Is it me?
Yeah, did you have a question?
Oh yeah, no, I just had a comment that I suppose in my own research is on Franco-Irish representations, and just I'd kind of say a bit caution in relation to the construction of Irish nationalism as puritanical and perverse is problematic. You'd see it in French literature, but also as well the Lock Hospital's history is connected to the history of Dublin as city of the empire of colonialism, and the service for the British soldiers. And I mentioned that in the context of the research into the 19th century, which I think is something that we've been sort of moving forward into the 20th century all the time, but to look back to the 19th century and the function of these institutions on it. So it was a syphilis hospital for the women as workers and as sex workers, and I think that we also have the look that we have the She Skeffingtons, and we have the activists there, particularly Hannah, in relation to not allowing that separation and and looking after, for example, as well the wives of soldiery as well. So seeing it from a perspective of commons. But I just make one point about the lock as well, is that during the famine years that the lock had the age profile of the women and girls, I would say, it dropped. So we obviously had a professional class of working women, sex workers, and again, a kind of critiquing the idea of victim here, which you do so well in your work, and I applaud you for that. But just to say that it dropped to 12, to average age 11, 12-year-olds, and it was remarked on by the women of Dublin who were working in sex work themselves, that they could see that the refugee aspect of it. So again, very, very contemporary and very relevant today. In representations of the film, however, I do think they do have a problematic representation. Lean in particular, very reflective. He has done this elsewhere, his Orientalism, his colonialism, his colonial gay. We have it in Shake Hands with the Devil as well, you know, the perversion. I wouldn't disagree that there was a lot of perversion in Irish nationalism, but I would say that what I find interesting with Loach is that it's connected to the service of the empire, and you mentioned Palestine, the Palestinian context and everything else. And, so I'm just saying that I think it's very valuable work you're doing, and I do think that tracking these histories connects us into colonialism, which is something we haven't really talked about so much with the War of Independence, which I find very interesting. Is that we haven't been focusing on its origins, you know, in Irish history as a colony, you know, and that Dublin occupying a strange and interesting space within that, you know, as a commons and such. Which had an odd relationship with the revolution, with the nationalism, and brought the radical as well in terms of Connolly, as I said, the Markowitz, Skeffington and so on. I suppose we haven't, in a sense, talked too much, assuming that the work of Margaret Ward and people and Mary McAuliffe are here that talk about the women revolutionaries, and but I will say that I would urge caution around the you know, the narrative around that, you know, and that's something something we'll have to kind of I don't know if you've been thinking about that in both of your work.
So first of all, on prostitution, absolutely, you know, the 19th century, the Contagious Diseases Act, you know, the work of Maria Luddy, the Curragh, Cove, the Wrens of the Curragh Cove. There is actually quite a lot written on that, very good solid work. So maybe we just need to interweave the 19th century with the 20th century a bit more. We'll get to that eventually. So absolutely. I think there's more than perhaps you suggest in some of those topics, but I think it's the connections that aren't being made. I suppose there is a large literature going back to, as you mentioned, Margaret Ward. You know, 30, 40 years, and some recent work as well, but there is a vast literature there. So, I mean, again, the other question, I suppose, is the one issue I will say, because I know others want to get in, is if you look at, you know, after independence, I was thinking of the Cadogan report, and that was shelved, you know, because the government of the time, I think the Minister for Justice, didn't like the findings, which were looking at, for instance, the increasing rates of prosecutions in the courts, for incest, for sexual assault, for rape. And there was, at one point, I think it was Owen O'Duffy, I'll have to go back over my notes, suggested that this was to do with the British being in Ireland, rather than our own kind of Irish-born, Republican, so-called native, having anything to do with that. And of course, we know from the Irish Women's Citizen and the suffrage movement, and Hannah herself, Hannah Sheehy Skeffington, because the Irish Citizen reported from the courts on all of these cases, you know, that isn't the case. We can't blame this on the British. So it's interesting to the British military in particular. So it's interesting to look at those kind of, again, discourses of blaming, and I suppose, again, I'm putting it very simplistically, but to me what happened in the post-independence period was that everything we're talking about, it didn't fit with the heroic narrative. So for instance, the haircutting, in the witness statements, you don't find witnesses, Irish combatants, talking about their involvement in haircutting.
You find it in the newspapers. You find it referred to in relation to other people. I think I have one case in Kilsheelan where someone talks about, they were involved with a woman who was seeing a soldier. She was working in a chemist shop, and it's corresponded with the RIC report. So it did happen. She reported it. So it doesn't fit. What we're discussing doesn't fit with the heroic narrative of the state. It's actually a source of shame to be doing that, I would say, to your fellow countrywomen, so to speak, particularly from your own class. And it's a microcosm of Irish society. Like, everyone knows everybody and what they're doing. And so, in my opinion, it's not a controversial thing to say. I think the IRA were overly concerned with women's movements. They were policing them. And that says something about sexuality and assumptions about women at that time, which again we see transfers into the new state, the incarceration of women, deviant women, all of that. So I think there's far more continuity with the pre-independence period than we perhaps seek to. But there's loads.
That's what you just said, exactly what I was kind of thinking. The prison complex and the kind of carceral complexes are, a continuation rather than
absolutely
an interruption. Sorry, that's what I meant in relation to the Lock Hospital.
Oh yeah, that was just
the
part of
there.
dialogue, like the dialogue. It wasn't,
So,
Any other questions? Okay, Dennis, you got. I'm sorry.
It's a very small one, so maybe we'll keep it for lunch. It's more kind of a niche. But I was just wondering about May Connolly. The film. And
I'd like to know more about it too.
The way that your film as well kind of play off each other is very interesting representation.
I hadn't seen that footage.
It's on the website for years.
Yeah, I haven't seen it.
Oh, yeah, there is. Yeah, there's another paper.
So maybe people. She is the subject of a paper this afternoon. So maybe we talk more about May Connolly later.
Yeah, because it is.
Yeah, is that okay? Sorry.
Yeah.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
We'll pick up on it. Well, thanks very much. I mean, it's really, really interesting, both presentations, public presentations.
Thank you.
So, thank you very much.